That's nasty.
Welcome back, guys. Chuck Nasty on Fantasy Football here. Just concluded week 5. It is Tuesday, the day of most importance. You guys got to pick up some waiver wire. Get a little action going. Do a little something to tilt the odds in your favor if you're not having a good season so far, or maybe just put a little cap on a really good team by adding a good defense or a good wide receiver this week. So I got some options for you. First and foremost, I'll be dropping the streaming defenses video right after this one. Make sure you check that out. But I'm going to go over players that are waiver wire pickups that are 50% owned or less. So these are ones that are available in more than 50% of leagues on Yahoo. And we'll go from there. If you guys haven't connected with me on social media, Twitter, @ChuckNastyGG. Instagram is the same. Facebook is the same. Feel free to DM me questions about your roster. If you have specific questions, you can always leave them in the comments down below on this video as well. I always try to get back to everybody. Had a couple of people tell me that the defenses last week that I was putting up in another video were not streaming options, but all of them were owned in less than 40% of their leagues, so I'm not really sure where that came from. But I'm here to help you guys. I want to respond to your comments, and if I can help you with your specific roster, by all means, let me know. We are 7 subscribers away from 200, which is kind of awesome considering this is the first year that we're doing this and we're only 5 weeks into it. Would be absolutely sweet if we can crush the 200 goal. Make sure you smash that subscribe button down below. I don't make any money doing this. I would like to at some point. It would be cool for me to be able to help others and then get paid to do it in their leagues. But we're just starting out. So here we go. Quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins, Minnesota Vikings, 41% owned on Yahoo. Now, you remember that press conference after last week where Adam Thielen was super pissed off, complaining about targets, Kirk Cousins, combination of everything? Well, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. 8 targets, 7 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Adam Thielen. So, maybe that doesn't change the fact that Kevin Stefanski clearly wants to run the ball in Minnesota, but I don't know that they're going to have that option at home against the Eagles next week. The Eagles' D has allowed 3 top 10 fantasy finishes at the quarterback position through 5 games. If you absolutely need a streaming quarterback this week, Kirk Cousins is an option for you, and he's probably available in most leagues. Next up, Secret Garden, Gardner Minshew. I've talked about him a ton of times, talked about his porn star mustache, about the fact that the Jacksonville Jaguars are capitalizing on his marketing for their home games. Pretty crazy. But he's averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game in 5 appearances with a season low of 16.1. That's a really, really good floor for somebody that's a rookie quarterback, especially playing for Jacksonville. So Gardner has thrown 2 touchdowns in 4 of his 5 appearances, at least 2. But the best part about him is that you want a quarterback that's not going to make a ton of mistakes, and it doesn't really look like Gardner is making any mistakes. He feels really comfortable. He's throwing in quality scenarios, like he's not throwing in a double coverage. He's not throwing in triple coverage. If the safety's over the top, in a cover 2, cover 3, he's not falling for that, which most rookie quarterbacks would. He's barely getting picked off this year, so a good option. Next up, Teddy Bridgewater, New Orleans Saints, 9% owned. He had a good game last week. Threw for 314 yards, 4 touchdowns to beat the Buccaneers. It was only his second multi-touchdown game of the season, and his first one where he threw over 200 yards. It really looked like the Saints were actually letting him air the ball out a little bit, so that was good. But he gets the Jacksonville Jaguars this week, which is kind of a hit or miss. So the Jaguars have been up or down. They have 3 games where they've given up 300 or more yards to quarterbacks, and they have 2 where they've given up less than 200. So it's hard to say whether or not they're going to have a great week that week. I think they're just inconsistent as a team, but not a bad streaming option if you need a quarterback. Moving on to the running back position. Most of you guys are probably more interested in running backs than quarterbacks unless you're in 2 QB leagues, so we'll go through them. Chase Edmonds, Arizona Cardinals. I own him in a couple of leagues. My buddy Josh constantly I wake up every morning to a trade offer for Chase Edmonds. I ain't doing it. David Johnson had 20 touches and 156 yards in their first win this weekend, right? After the game, he told some of the reporters that his back seized up, which is why Chase Edmonds got 11 touches. If he's out, Chase Edmonds is going to get a ton of work against a bad Atlanta Falcons run defense. They have given up 2 top 13 finishes to Dalvin Cook and Marlon Mack, and he's going to be in line for a ton of work if David Johnson sits. I'm not sure that he's going to, but either way, he's a pretty good speculative ad just in case something happens to him. Now, John Hillerman, New York Giants, 0% owned. You know that big top waiver priority we talked about a couple weeks ago? Last week even? I think it was 2 weeks ago. Wayne Gallman got a concussion on Sunday, left the game. And guess who came in? Mr. Hillerman. So it really looks like Saquon might potentially be back, but they're also saying he might not be back because it's a Thursday night game, and they're not really sure if they want to force him in to action that soon. Totally get it. I mean, he's their superstar. He's also a freak of nature and is probably already recovered from his high ankle sprain. But they have a bad week this week against the Patriots. However, the volume's going to be there if there's no Saquon in there. So should be a pretty good deal for him. Elijah Penny was the other guy that saw a little bit of work there, but even then, it was primarily Hillerman that was getting that work. Nyheim Hines, Indianapolis Colts, 23% owned. He's going in a bye week this week. I actually added him last week in 2 or 3 leagues because I own Marlon Mack in a ton. Great handcuff for Marlon Mack, but also he gets almost all of the PPR passing down work in the Colts offense. So if you can predict that they're going to have a negative game script where they have to throw the ball, he's going to get a ton of work. Marlon Mack's banged up a little bit. He was a game time decision this past week, and he ended up getting some decent work this week. He's gotten 4 for 46 in catches, 6 for 39. You know, obviously not big numbers, but if something happens to Marlon Mack, he is going to be very big for fantasy owners. Raheem Mostert, we talked about him a couple of times. My boy must start, 33% owned on Yahoo. You know, I'm only going to say it a handful of times. Some of these guys, I feel like I sound like a broken record because I continue to talk about them and their ownership just barely creeps up. That's fine. You don't have to listen to me if you don't want to. And frankly, with Tevin Coleman coming back to action this past week, he's probably going to take the majority of Raheem Mostert's workload. But one of these 3 guys always seems to get banged up. Tevin Coleman, Jeff Wilson's banged up currently, and then Matt Breida, who's been injured like more than he's been active. So good speculative ad. He might be something where if either of the 2 of these guys go down, he gets a good chunk of their work. But prior to this past Monday, when San Fran beat the living snot out of the Cleveland Browns, he's had double-digit rush attempts, 79-plus yards in each of those games. So a good ad in case of an injury, but this is like a 3-headed snake of a backfield. So just be aware of that. Next up, Jamaal Williams, Green Bay Packers, 11% owned. Talked about him last week as well. But you saw what Aaron Jones did this week, right? He had like 4 touchdowns, and Jamaal Williams is still recovering from that concussion on that really, really nasty hit against the Eagles. But the Packers are relying a ton on their running backs, and as of right now, it is only Aaron Jones. But the games when Williams was active, he had 12 and 15 touches respectively. So he is a strong supplement to Aaron Jones. And as good as Aaron Jones is, somebody's going to have to take those snaps where he's taking a snap off. And that will be Jamaal Williams as long as he's healthy. So when he comes back, I'm pretty sure that is going to be the guy to plug in there. And, even with the 2 of those backs there, he might generate some fantasy value, but it'll be even better if something happens to Aaron Jones. So keep that in mind. Next up, DeAndre Washington, Oakland Raiders, 0% owned. He got a touchdown this week, which was kind of good. Josh Jacobs owns this backfield. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with Josh Jacobs at this point in time. But when Jacobs was on the sideline for a little bit, Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington kind of flip-flopped and took over that extra work. And as soon as Jacobs came back, both of those guys, fell to the wayside. But if something happens to Jacobs, these are good upside guys. Primarily DeAndre Washington, I feel like he would be the back to own as opposed to Jalen Richard. But it's more so of, an injury stash than it is an actual ad. Just, be aware of that. Let's go into some wide receivers. Mohamed Sanu, Atlanta Falcons, 27% owned on Yahoo. Now he's had 3 good games in a row, which is good enough for me to say that there's a consistent pattern of him actually doing something in fantasy. And he got his first touchdown this past week, 5 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown. But, it's hard to attribute where the workload's coming from. Is it because Calvin Ridley's banged up that he's getting more of this work? I'm not entirely sure. However, the Falcons have a sweet matchup with the Atlanta Falcons have a sweet matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. Swiss cheese secondary. You could probably even fire up their 3rd or 4th receiving option in this offense in this matchup, and they're still going to return some fantasy value this week. So, food for thought. Auden Tate. This was the running joke I had about the gold on the periodic table. It's not that funny. That's fine. 22% owned on Yahoo. I picked him up in a couple leagues last week because John Ross is going to be out for an extended period of time. But, he had a decent game this week. Before him having the touchdown that really saved his fantasy day, he didn't have a great game. He had 3 catches for 26 yards. So PPR format's at B5.6. But that touchdown really helped him. And, they play against the Baltimore Ravens this week, whose secondary has not been good. They have averaged 280 passing yards per game against their team. And Tony Jefferson just had a knee issue and is now out for the season. So when you lose a starting safety like that, it opens up some more holes back there. So not a bad play. Deante Johnson, Pittsburgh Steelers. Talked about him last week as well, maybe even the week before that. 34% owned on Yahoo. He had 5 catches for 27 yards on 8 targets against the Ravens. Now, I'm going to say that this was a bit of a fluke, mainly because his primary quarterback got absolutely demolished and taken out of the game and then put in Devlin Hodges. So, this is one of the few teams that's working with a 3rd-string quarterback, and we're not really sure how it's going to go, but Deante Johnson has returned value in the 2 weeks that he's played when he had a consistent quarterback in there. I think that Hodges will be okay. It's not really going to change that much from Rudolph, but, just something to maybe keep note of. Duke Williams. Now, his name's not actually Duke, nor do I have any idea how to say his first name, but if you're looking him up on Yahoo, it does say Duke, so that's all that matters. You got that news about Zay Jones being traded for a 5th-round pick to the Oakland Raiders. Well, Duke Williams was the only person behind John Brown in snap percentage this week. 82% to 78%. Caught all 4 of his targets for 29 yards and a touchdown. And I'm pretty sure that the Bills were okay trading Zay Jones for a pick because they're confident in Duke Williams' ability. So he played in the Canadian Football League year before, and this was his first NFL game, and he had a pretty good week. Now he's going into their bye week coming up, but then they play the Dolphins after that. So we like anybody that plays against the Miami Dolphins. Geronimo Allison, Green Bay Packers, 37% owned on Yahoo. I had some pretty high expectations set for him this week. I'm not going to lie to you. No Devontae Adams. He only got 2 catches for 28 yards. He had 6 targets, which is promising, but didn't do a ton with them. I was expecting him to step more into a primary role. It just didn't really happen. And then the Packers were also leading the game for the majority of the time, so they weren't required to throw the ball a ton. So if Devontae Adams sits another week, it might be a good deal to plug Allison in again, or at least stash him, see what ends up happening with maybe a more consistent volume in a game that's a little bit closer against the Lions. But we'll see. Darius Slayton, New York Giants. Now, he's one of the only remaining targets left right now. Evan Ingram is probably not going to play this week. Sterling Shepard's out. And Slayton caught 4 of 6 targets for 62 yards and a touchdown on Sunday. And, he had a 35-yard touchdown, which was actually a pretty nice play in that game, even though, they lost. I don't know how much I want to invest in the Giants offense, especially considering they don't have a ton of options. With Evan Ingram out, it's going to be primarily Darius Slayton out there and Golden Tate in the slot, and that's it. But the positive is the Giants are going to be trailing in a ton of games, so they're going to be forced to throw, which means there's going to be some upside for a big fantasy game. So keep that in mind as well. Anthony Miller, Chicago Bears, 14% owned on Yahoo. He had 7 targets in London against the Raiders. He caught 4 of those for 52 yards, so 9.2 in PPR. The biggest thing to remember was that Taylor Gabriel was out. So he had some issues with a concussion week prior, didn't get cleared in time. And, Miller's going to get some of that volume if Taylor Gabriel sits. So he might be another speculative add just to consider if Taylor Gabriel is not in the next matchup as well. Keyshawn Johnson, Arizona Cardinals. This is another deal where an injury provided an opportunity. Didn't exactly pan out, but Christian Kirk was out this past week. Keyshawn came in, had 7 targets, which was the second most on the Cardinals team. He only caught 2 for 22 yards, so he didn't have a good game. But if he's getting targets and Christian Kirk is sidelined again, he's a good upside option. Also very cheap in DFS, but keep an eye on some of these guys. You're not going to want to play them unless the primary weapon ahead of them in the passing game is on the sideline. I'm not saying start Keyshawn Johnson if everybody on the Cardinals is playing next week. Don't do that. But then the last wide receiver I got for you is none other than Byron Pringle. 1% owned, Kansas City Chiefs. So going into this game, he had 2 catches for 20 yards. And then Sunday, he had 6 for 103 and a touchdown on 9 targets. I don't really know what to do with Mr. Pringle here. Tyreek Hill is supposed to come back soon. There's still other receivers there that are, arguably more talented than Byron Pringle. But depending on how deep your league is, might be worth an ad. So just something to keep in mind. A couple of tight ends before we scoot out of here. Gerald Everett, LA Rams, 8% owned on Yahoo. He's been a streaming option at tight end for a couple of weeks. But he had a big game on Thursday. 7 for 136 yards on 11 targets. And in 2 weeks, he now has 19 targets, 12 catches, 180 yards, and 1 touchdown. In 2 weeks. That's crazy. Because not only was Tyler Higbee active, but he's healthy. It's not a scenario where because Tyler Higbee is in the lineup and he's banged up that they're giving the work to Gerald Everett. It's not the case. Gerald Everett is just having back-to-back good games with a healthy additional tight end on the field. So, they play the 49ers next. Might be a high-scoring game. Not entirely sure, but a streaming option for you. Dawson Knox, Buffalo Bills, 16% owned. I know that I've talked about him before. He didn't have a very fantasy-relevant game. 2 catches for 12 yards on 5 targets. But having 5 targets in the Bills offense is not bad. And the other tight end that is even less fantasy relevant, Lee Smith, vultured a touchdown from our boy Dawson on the goal line. So, it is what it is. If you're in a league that is a tight end premium league or you're just really thin at tight end, Dawson might be an option for you. He's got a bit of an opportunity there, but we'll see entirely. And then, next up, we got Darren Fells, Houston Texans, 0% owned. He had 2 touchdowns this week. Only 2 targets, 2 touchdowns. That's fine. And the Texans were putting up a ton of points this week. So spreading the ball around, spreading the wealth a little bit. But this is another deep league potential option because Will Fuller had a pop-off game. But him and Darren Fells both have 3 scores in the last couple weeks. So something to keep in mind. Last guy I got for you, Chris Herndon. I've talked about him before. I didn't mention him as much in some of these videos because I have league mates that watch these videos and look at some of these recommendations, and I really wanted Chris Herndon on my team. So now that I own him in 4 leagues, I'm going to tell you to go pick up Chris Herndon. Coming off a 4-week suspension and their bye week, and their primary tight end there, Ryan Griffin, who's a journeyman. He's traveled all around a bunch of different teams. Has been used on 93% of the snaps. I feel like the second Chris Herndon gets back into practice, gain some of that trust from Adam Gase. He's going to get a ton of work, and they're going to be designing plays around him. Not to mention, when Sam Darnold comes back, Herndon's value only goes up even further. So 30% owned on Yahoo, available in 70% of your leagues. Go pick this man up. That is all I got for you in the waiver wire week 6 video. As always, appreciate the love and support. Anybody that has not subscribed to the channel, we're 7 away from 200. I would appreciate it, helping me grow my channel, these videos, to be able to give you guys better advice, more videos on how you can help win your league or just make the playoffs and actually have a fighting chance to make some money. That's my goal in this whole deal. Leave any roster-specific questions, comments, or concerns down below. I'll be sure to get back to you. And keep an eye out for the streaming defenses video, which I will be dropping shortly. Have a good day, and we will see you on Thursday for the Stardom Sit-'em for Week 6. Let's get it done.